Hey everybody! In this video, we are going to be talking about how to get started with oil paint, particularly focusing on safety precautions, because if you don't use it properly, it can cause some harm to your body or to the environment. So we really want to emphasize safety when we talk about getting started with oil. So the first thing we want to talk about is, what is oil paint? How is it different from maybe acrylic paint or watercolor? So oil paint is essentially just pigment and a binder, just like every other kind of paint. However, the binder in this case is oil. Oftentimes the oil would be either linseed oil or walnut oil. Many artists just have a personal preference over which oil they prefer. Some people don't notice any difference whatsoever. So that would be our first thing to know, is oil is what holds the paint together. And because of that, it makes cleanup a little more challenging, and it also takes much longer to dry than acrylic or watercolor, just because of the oil within it. So to get started, we want to talk about what materials we need in order to work with oil paint. So the first thing you need, obviously, is oil paint. You'll probably want a palette knife or two to help mix your paint together on your palette. You'll need a variety of brushes. I prefer stiffer brushes when I'm working with oil paint, and then I have a few softer ones for dry brushing and glazing near the end. I also find that I use a lot more brushes when I'm working with oil paint, just because it's such a pain to clean them. So having a variety on hand is always good. You'll need some kind of solvent, and that solvent is what dissolves the oil in the paint to thin it or to clean it. You may want some kind of painting medium to work with. You'll want rags for cleanup and also for just wiping your brushes off. I like to use just cut up old t-shirts or towels, things like that. That way I'm being a little more environmentally friendly by reusing things. And then in order to protect your skin, it's often helpful to wear gloves to prevent any of the chemicals from the solvents or from the paint itself from seeping into your skin, especially if you're a very messy artist, or you're really like working with your hands on the paint. That's a great safety consideration. So those would be some of the materials that you need. In terms of a palette, many artists like to use glass. They'll tape that to their workspace, they'll put their paint on it, then when they're all done, they can use a knife and just scrape the paint off. Really clean, easy way to work. Those are your materials. Let's talk about solvents. What are they? So solvents would be any kind of material that is going to thin your paint out. It's going to kind of break up those oil particles and make it thinner and easily more manipulated on your painting surface. This will make your paint dry faster because it breaks up that oil, and it will also help you with cleanup. Now, we've come a really long way even from when I was in college, but especially from like the early to mid 1900s. We're using things like turpentine, using mineral spirits. These are extremely like toxic, fuming, like smelly stuff. So, I mean, I can think about when I was in college, I was in my painting class, I'd paint for 3 hours a day. And when I would leave, I'd just have this like thick taste of mineral spirits in the back of my throat for hours afterwards. And I'd just have a pounding headache. It was horrible for my health. It was not good. And I was in a huge room with ventilation, and it was still that bad just because it was sitting next to me as I was working. Same with printmaking, using those things for cleanup. It's not good to inhale. It's bad for you. Turpentine, for example, I should say mineral spirits are a petroleum distillate. So, you know, we get it from petroleum, which is why it's so stinky, right? Turpentine, on the other hand, is made from a resin out of a pine tree. So it smells very piney. I have extremely strong memories of my grandmother when I think of turpentine. She was also a painter, and I inherited her brushes and her paints. And so whenever I open up that paint box, it just hits me, turpentine, even like decades later, turpentine. So those things are really, really strong smelling chemicals that require a lot of ventilation. So we want to move away from that sort of stuff just for health and safety purposes. Now, because technology has brought us into the future, we have things such as odorless mineral spirits now. So what I use at home is Gamsol. So Gamsol is completely odorless, which is amazing. You don't smell it. So that's something that's like not going to affect you nearly as much as you would otherwise with like full-blown mineral spirits. Another thing to consider when we're talking about solvents is their flammability. So because they are, petroleum based or even turpentine, they have a very high rate of flammability. So we need to be really careful when it comes to storing them and disposing of them. You don't want to just throw your oil-soaked rags in the garbage. You can start a dumpster fire. So obviously we don't want that to happen. So here are a few ways that we can safely take care of our oily rags. Number one, do not leave them in piles. That can cause spontaneous combustion. If you're at home and don't have a lot of options, you can let your rags dry out safely by either hanging them or laying flat on the ground outdoors to let things dry. You can store them in a sealed metal container or a Ziploc bag, so we keep the air out of it until you can take it to be properly disposed of. And then the last thing that we want to talk about is proper disposal. So, what do we do with this stuff when we're done with it? Oftentimes I will keep my mineral spirits in a jar, so glass jar, metal jar, things like that. I have a special mineral spirit jar that I keep that has kind of holes in a little inset so that I can scrub my brushes along it, and then all the paint particles sink to the bottom and are separate so that my mineral spirits last longer, which is really, really helpful for me because then I don't need to throw it out as much. But here's the big deal. Do not pour it down the drain. Don't do that. That is an environmental hazard. Very, very bad for the water supply. So in terms of proper disposal, you've got two options. First of all, which is probably your best option, would be to contact your local hazardous waste disposal place. Call them, see what to do. Oftentimes you can just drop off your containers of used mineral spirits or turpentine or whatever it is you're using, and they will dispose of it properly for you. There's often a fee with that involved. Another thing you can do if you're using really small amounts of mineral spirits would be to just leave your container open in a highly ventilated area, preferably maybe outside, and just let it evaporate. And then you'll just have your jar to reuse again. So those would be your ways to dispose of things properly, safely, so that we aren't contaminating the environment or our workspace. The next thing we want to talk about would be mediums. So what are mediums? Why do we use them? Oftentimes we have two kind of different types of mediums. So there is the oil-based medium, which would be our most traditional things. So obviously our paint is made with pigment and oil. So if we add more oil, it's going to thin out the paint, make it a little more transparent. Now the only downside, or it might be an upside to you, depending on what it is your goals are, adding more oil to your paint is going to make it take much longer to dry. So if you want to extend that dry time and have lots of time to blend and layer and do all of that, then using oil as a medium is going to be a really great option for you. The other types of mediums we have are kind of petroleum-based. They're a mixture of different chemicals. So there are two that I have in mind that I like to use. The first would be Liquin. Liquin is very smelly, so again, you want to work in a ventilated area and don't use a lot of it. If you use too much, it's going to get really gummy and gross. Another medium that we have is Galkid. So Galkid will also thin your oil colors, makes them more transparent. And then what's great about Liquin and Galkid is that they speed up the drying, which I personally like because I'm an acrylic and watercolor person, so I'm used to that speed. I like speed. They work better for me personally, but again, personal preference and what it is your goals are. Do you want a speed drying time or slow drying time? Then the last thing that we want to talk about is cleanup. We want to make sure that we dispose of everything properly. So generally when you have oil paint, you need to clean it up. You're going to wipe off as much as you can with your rags. You'll use your solvent to thin the paint off of your brush. Other people even clean with just oil. So some people will use even just baby oil for cleanup because again, that breaks down the paint and the oil in your brushes to get it off of your brush or your palette knife as much as possible. And then you can wipe it off with your rag. Following that, you're going to wash it, use a nice brush cleaner, really get as much paint out as you can so that your brushes aren't bricks when they dry. And then any rags or other materials that are soaked in solvent or paint, again, we want to let that evaporate before disposing of it, or if you have those flammable cans, you want to put it in there to keep everything safe. You can scrape off your used oil paint so that you have a smooth surface on your palette again, or if you're lazy like me, just let it dry. In the description of this video, I did also include some links to blog posts that I found to be really helpful when it comes to talking about like what kind of solvents to use, what kind of mediums to use, and why. Hopefully you'll find them also useful for you as it comes time to start gathering supplies. And in the next video, I'm going to talk about some of the very basics of working with oil paint. We're going to do some alla prima painting and just kind of get the feel of the texture and the application of it before we dive into using those mediums and different specialized techniques. So thanks for watching and keep creating.